Hey everyone, in today's video I'm going to tell you everything I know about watercolor pens like this, how you can fill them effectively, what are some good brands to squeeze into pens like this, and also how to dry them quickly and properly. So let's start with the empty pens first. So you can buy this on eBay. They are sold in packs. They are available in half pens like this, which has a 2 ml capacity, 2 millimeter, or 2 times the size of full pen with around 4 ml capacity. A 15 ml watercolor tube can fill a half pen around 6 to 7 times, depending on whether or not the paint will shrink when it dries. Some paint will shrink much smaller, some paint will remain in its actual size after you squeeze it into the pen. A typical 12 half pen metal box like this can actually hold more than 12 half pens. This is removable, and when you put the pens inside, make sure that the paint is dry before you push them in. If not, you're going to get your hands messy. And before you push the pens into or onto the tray, make sure you push this tab down so that when you push it in, it will snap firmly in place. So here, this tray is holding 12 half pens. This empty row here, you can fit another 6 pens. Some boxes have a wider middle row here, and for those boxes you can put the half pens vertically, and those boxes can fit 7 half pens in the middle row. And before you put the half pens in, it would be good to put some blue tack or white tack so that you can stick the pens onto the base, so that when the box is moving around in your bag, no pens will move inside. So what are some brands that are good for squeezing into pens like this? Well, the brand actually matters because of how the company makes those watercolor paint. Watercolor paint is usually created by mixing binder and pigment, so they will mix them thoroughly. The binder will bind the pigment together into some sort of paste so that they can be sold in tubes like this. Some companies would add extra something to their paint to make them more flowy, more easier to dissolve. For example, with M. Graham and Sennelier paint, they add honey. Honey will absorb moisture from the air around to make the paint moist and easy to dissolve with water. Such paint, they are more suitable for use indoors rather than outdoors. So for example, with Mission Gold, they also use honey in their paint. Here I have Hooker's Green from Mission Gold. This has been dried for several days, but you can see the surface is very glossy. Now the paint already is fixed, it doesn't move, it doesn't flow anymore. So this is considered safe for use inside a box, but the surface, it will never be matte like this. This is Cobalt Teal Blue from Daniel Smith. Daniel Smith don't use honey in their paint, so their paint can dry with a matte surface. If you really want to use paint with honey in them, I recommend you test out one color first, just in case the paint is very runny after painting. It won't make a bigger mess compared to having many of these pens with honey. Of all the brands that I have tested, Daniel Smith seems to dry better. Now my experience is limited, so do let me know in the comment section what are some brands that you have used that are suitable or not suitable for use in half pens like this. So here I have some other brands. Schminker should work fine. M. Graham has honey, so when the paint dries, it always has that glossy look on it. Stephen Quiller watercolor also dries with a glossy surface. Jackson's Art. Some people say that Jackson's Art uses Sennelier paint, so this is like a rebrand of Sennelier, and this dries with a glossy surface as well. Mission Gold also dries with a glossy surface, and so does Shin Han. Even if you are using Daniel Smith paint, not all colors are suitable for use in pens. Some colors, for example, Viridian, this will dry back into a hard rock. So when it does that, it's going to be very difficult or impossible to dissolve the paint again. So with Viridian, for example, you may want to use other brands that are softer and easier to dissolve. When you are filling the pans, it's always good to have some tissue around. And when you are dealing with a new tube of paint, when the tube looks very fat, like it's almost bursting, be careful, because sometimes when you open the cap, the paint would rush out. So have an empty pan by the side so that when the paint does rush out, at least you can quickly fill it up instead of having the paint run all over the place. And now I'm going to show you how you can fill up the pans optimally so that you don't have gaps like that between the paint and the plastic wall, and to prevent cracks like this. Some colors are more prone to cracks like this because when the paint dries too fast, the pigment actually separates and creates that gap. But some paint, they are more flexible, so even when it dries, they would slowly pull apart and you don't see things like this. So for this demonstration, I will be using this new tube of Stephen Quiller's Pyro Red. This is Stephen Quiller's Pyro Red. I'm using a Sharpie ultrafine marker to write this. And this is PR255. I write down the name of the colors because if I have too many colors and I forget the name of the colors, at least I have something to refer to. Plastic pans like this, they are quite cheap. You can find them on eBay. By the way, I bought this color because it was on discount and comes with free shipping to Singapore. So I bought a tube just to try. So when you are squeezing out the paint, squeeze into the corners first. So there are 4 corners, so just squeeze into the corners. Basically push the paint into the corners. And this paint from Stephen Quiller and all the other tubes from Stephen Quiller that I've tested so far, they are very liquid. So they almost flow out from the tube, so you have to be a bit careful. So just squeeze the paint into the 4 corners and make sure that they fill up properly. Make sure that there are no gaps. This color is more liquid and it's very easy for me to fill. I know for a fact that when this color dries, it will not have any cracks because this is quite elastic. If you are trying out a new color for the first time, I recommend you fill up half the pan first, squeeze into the corners and fill it halfway. So on the next day after it dries, you may see cracks, you may see the paint shrink. That's where you squeeze and fill up the second time to basically fill up all the gaps, and a third time if necessary. Just for demonstration purposes, I'm also going to squeeze out this tube of Daniel Smith Azo Yellow. So this is not as flowy, not as liquid compared to Stephen Quiller's paint. So once again, squeeze into the corners, rotate the pan and squeeze into the corners again, and into the corners. If you see any gaps, you may want to squeeze out a bit more paint like this and sort of move the paint around, push them towards the gap to have the paint stick to the side wall. On the next day, let's say you see something like this where the paint dries with a big crack in the middle or several small cracks, or the paint is actually detached from the side wall. That's where you can squeeze out more paint to fill in the gaps. So usually for me nowadays, I would fill up the pan halfway, dry it overnight and check back tomorrow. If it dries properly, I will fill it up the second time. After filling it the second time and leaving it to dry overnight, on the third day, if there are still cracks, I would just top it up. By the time you fill it up the third time, you would have a pan that is filled completely without any air gaps inside the paint. So this is actually the second time I am filling up this pen. I'm going to leave this to dry tonight. Tomorrow I'm very sure that the cracks will develop again, and that's when I will top up the third and last time to fill up the gaps and to make the surface smoother. And this is how that phthalo blue will turn out after it is topped up for the third time. It's going to dry completely like this. If you think that filling up the pens 3 separate times is quite tedious, well, you are right, it's quite tedious, but it does fill up the pen very completely. If you were to fill it up one single time, top it up to the top, like this, like what I'm doing right now, the paint may actually sometimes dry with air gaps inside the paint, and you may not see the air gap. For paint that is very liquid, very flowy, they usually do not create air gaps inside the paint when drying. This, by the way, it's Jackson's Art Permanent Magenta. You can see it's very flowy. When I tilt the pen like this, the paint actually moves, so that's why you have to dry the paint properly first. When you have air gaps inside the paint that you cannot see, sometimes while you are painting, you may see these little holes that appear in your pens. I have one here as well. And these are actually air gaps beneath the surface, but when I started painting, I started to see the cracks like this, and here as well, you see that. These tiny holes and cracks like this, they may not present a problem to you, but for me, where mold growth is a problem here, sometimes the mold may grow inside those gaps, because when water is trapped inside those gaps, the water doesn't dry as easily compared to on the surface, so the moisture attracts mold and mold can grow. After you have squeezed the paint into pens like this, it's time to dry them. The best way to dry them, as I have discovered, is if you happen to have or use this metal box, you can remove the tray. Do not press these pens into the tray here because they are still wet. It's going to be very messy. So I would actually put them carefully here, like this. And then close the box like this, but don't close it completely, leave a gap there. And I would put this under the sun so that this gets heated up. The paint inside will get heated up, and that would dry the pens pretty quickly. I don't close the cover completely. By leaving a gap, I allow the moisture to escape from the box. If you are using other watercolor boxes that already have paint in them, after you top up, you can just close the cover like this. Again, leave a gap. Doing so will dry the paint while protecting the paint from direct sunlight. You can actually use a hairdryer to dry the paint very quickly, but that would actually just dry the surface of the paint, not the paint that is beneath the surface. So by leaving the paint out to dry over a longer period of time, you can dry the paint properly. So that's all I know about using paint in pens like this. If I have left out anything, if you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below. And before you go, I just want to let you know that I am selling off some of my excess watercolor paint so that I can make more space to get more colors to test out and also to make more videos like this. So if you are interested to get some paint from me to help me out, you can check out the list of colors that I'm selling. The link is in the video description below. Alright, so that's all for today's video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.